Danke.
Valentin, great to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, Valentin, we got the last spot, so this is going to be hopefully high energy and be highly energizing towards tomorrow. We heard a lot about banking, we heard a lot about fintechs, we heard a lot about how the world is becoming more digital throughout the day. I want to really focus the next half an hour, focus a little bit more on the human side of things. So, I mean, to start off with really, why are you here? I mean, just heard this great story from Corinna. You have been in fintech a long time with N26. Why did you originally decide to get into this space and not stay at Deutsche Bank, as I learned you originally started?
So I think when we started the company, I mean, that's quite some time ago, about 10 years ago, we started the company actually from our living rooms. And at that point in time, we were coming out of a financial crisis. I think most of investment banks and also consulting companies were more on the downturns and not hiring, super exciting. I got into startup more by accident. I started with Rocket Internet, actually looked at consulting and investment banking after I started in Switzerland, and more by accident started with Rocket. And at that point in time, 2012, 2011, I had the opportunity to look into models like Stripe and Square. At that point in time, I think not many people in Europe didn't even know what those companies were doing. They were not valued at 50 billion, but more like a couple of hundred millions. And then only stayed there for a year and then said, okay, there's a huge opportunity in fintech. All the big players have problems to transform their business into digital because of regulation and because of the size, just the pure size of the organizations. This transformation will take years. And so we saw that there is going to be a big, massive market share shift from traditional banks to new players. And then we said, okay, let's try to raise some funds, and we got lucky.
Well, thank you. I think one thing I want to get your opinion on, if we're talking around today, I mean, it has been some very interesting but also very tough couple of years for banking and for fintechs in particular. Lots of people, I mean, it's only February, but they said today to me, this has been really, really a hard January. So I'm almost wondering, so I was reading the newspaper last week and Jürgen Klopp said, well, I don't have the energy anymore. So I'm almost wondering if I'm looking towards you, do you see a Jürgen Klopp moment coming in fintech? Maybe even for you personally, great stage for that. But more importantly, how do you see the energy going and how do we actually keep up the energy with another tough year ahead?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think where I personally take my energy from, but also the teams that I work with, is actually the teams and the people that we work with. So for me, the most exciting, especially in my role, is that I can work with the people that we've selected over the last 10 years. And it's the right minds that I work with that excite me and that give me energy every day. The other thing is, personally, I'm super interested in product and innovation. It's always exciting for me to see customers coming and saying, you have launched that feature, I use it, or I have a shared account with someone, so that gives me personally a lot of energy. And I think also, if I look at our team, most of them are very focused on customers, the change and the impact they can have. And I think for me, it's about impact, the people that you work with, and what you can change for customers. And that keeps me motivated. Back to the realization, I think that I had maybe much earlier already in my entrepreneurial career. It's a fucking hard journey. So it's a 24-hour job. Today, a little bit different. Today, we have a management board, we have a supervisory board, we have a 5-year financial plan, and we have a lot of capital. I think in the beginning, it's pure war. And maybe war isn't too extreme word in these times, but it's a daily fight for success. And it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of luck. Fortunately, we had some of these things coming together. But I think, especially in a time as we had it in the last, I would say, 2 years, when you peak at valuations and then multiples come down, private equity investment or venture investment really is not there for the last 1.5 years. A lot of people realize how hard that journey is, and then if you're not successful or cannot raise funds because not even your fault, then I think it hits double hard. And so you need luck, you need the right moment, you need to have some investors to believe, and you need to have the right team, and then manage your energy well.
And let me pick you up on that one. So I actually stood on the stage last year and we had a discussion what is happening to the market. And I was being a little bit hopeful where the market is not going to have a great year, but it's also not going to be catastrophic. So depending on how you look at it, funding into fintechs and to banking by private equity more generally is down by more between 40 and 65%, depending on how you take the numbers. Does it feel at the moment we're turning a corner? Are you hopeful for this year, or you think we're going to see the same as last?
So I think as an entrepreneur, what we learned, or even more accelerated, or I'm more focused on, is the company performance. And I think as a founder, you have always the responsibility to balance out the external influence. And so there are years where everybody tells you need to spend more in marketing, you need to burn 50 million more, 100 million more, you need to be quicker. And then there are times like now or last year where people say, kill half of the team, fire everybody, reduce cost. And as a founder, you need to obviously take all of this input, but in the end, you need to take the best decision for the company for the next 5 to 10 years. And I think markets have been. I wouldn't like to be in a position to raise funds in the last 1.5 years. I think that's super shitty, independent of company performance. But what is more and more important, and what it grounds you to, is that you focus on the key fundamentals of the business. And can be, in these times, maybe profitability, can be growth, but what is sustainable, and you need to balance that out and take the right decisions. What got much more difficult, I think, in the last years is you always need to plan in a risk buffer, because it's such uncertain times that you can actually never go 100%. You always need to say, okay, my most risky strategy is 50%, and I have 50% buffer depending on what is coming. In the end, I think that the good companies will always be able to raise funds, are also able to raise funds today. I think we will see a market return at one point. In Europe, I see still the danger that the European venture capital scene is pretty young, especially at the scale, if you look at the last years, how it grew. And I see, hopefully we don't see too much liquidity being pulled out of that market. We've seen a lot of US funds closing their European businesses. So let's see what impact that will have. We've seen that in the 2000s when there were 8 years of basically a long time of no limited investment. I think we are past that, but I think I see some, especially early stage companies with great business model, will not be surviving that time, unfortunately.
So it's going to stay a difficult year. I mean, if we're looking towards tomorrow, so Corinna just told me we have about 250 entrepreneurs in the space. We have more than 20 companies also pitching. Any other things you would call out, any other surprises I almost to check you would expect for this year to come their way?
I think as an entrepreneur, I would always be super focused on my own business. And then, there's, I think early stage, especially if you're Series A or early stage seed Series A is much easier today than it was maybe when, I don't know if it's easier, but it's always hard, but it's maybe a little bit, there's more capital in general. I think where it's really tough today is if you want to raise $1 billion or 500 million. I mean, that's where people are very selective, and there's also not a lot of players in Europe. I think for early stage is a good time. At the same time, what I've also seen in our employee base, and we had a lot of entrepreneurs leaving N26 after being 4 or 5 years with us, founding their own companies. I think the respect that people now have to found their own company is much, much bigger than it was 2 years ago, because they have seen other people going out, raising funds, and maybe having difficulty to raise second round. So I think we need to still motivate people to go out there, take the opportunity, because it's a much tougher time today than it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
No, absolutely. I mean, one thing which I find interesting, if I'm looking how a lot of the growth plans have evolved, so 10 years ago, it almost seemed to be you try to scale it up in your country, be it Germany, be it wherever, and then definitely try to go towards the US. I think one thing I'm really keen to hear from you, I mean, N26 is one of the few fintechs which is truly European at this point in time. How important do you see Europe, or do you think at the moment really concentrate on your home country and nothing else right now?
So I mean, we tried different journeys, and it was expensive, but we had some learning. So We had business in the US for some time, only in a beta but a couple of quite some customers. We had a business in Brazil that we are closing down recently. I think our biggest learning over the last years is, especially with financial holding regulation that you have in Europe, which is pretty new. From my perspective, expansion into other regulatory areas is extremely difficult. And so at the same time, I think the realization is that we have a market share of maybe, I don't know, below 2% in Europe. Means it's not like with other businesses that we are serving 90% of the market. So I think it's a natural step for us to focus on Europe. And I think in the past, it was a combination of maybe entrepreneurial positivity and a lack of maybe regulatory experience or real feeling of that we expanded quickly into some markets. But I think it would have been better also earlier to focus on Europe. And so I think in the end, you can build a super big business in Europe only. And so that can be a really big company by focusing on Europe only. And I think the market is big enough. And so therefore, I see us as truly European. And also at the same time, I think we have one banking license in Europe, active in 24 markets in Europe. So what the European Union has done over the last years with regulation in all the markets, similar, not the same, still a lot of topics to work on, but it's a foundation for our business model, and I think that works pretty well.
Perfect. A couple of follow-up questions on that one. I think the first one, I mean, you just compared Europe towards the US and Brazil, but what were some of the unexpected hindrances you saw? What was the stuff which surprised you when you tried to explore other European market? I'm sure it wasn't just language.
You mean in Europe?
Yes, in Europe.
So in Europe, I think Europe, you have a target group that is still pretty similar. Yeah, I think everybody uses either Android or iOS, so the platform that we operate on is pretty similar. I think the younger generation is also much more homogeneous today than it was maybe 30 years ago, because you have the same brands, you have the same platforms that you're on. Everybody's using TikTok and the others. So it makes it easier to expand into all markets. At the same time, you still have very different habits when it comes to cash. Sometimes you have big barriers when it comes to very simple things. Are you able to use one IBAN in all the markets in Europe? Or do you still need a Spanish IBAN to pay your rent in Spain? And these things, to explore them, where on paper, from a European Union perspective, everything should work with one IBAN, and that was the idea of introducing an IBAN concept in Europe. And then factually, it's not there, and it will take maybe 15 more years to be there. So that's a couple of the learnings that we had in Europe. I think still Europe is pretty. It's good to navigate in. I think the distance also makes a difference. If you have a business in the US, same time zone. Here in Europe, I think that's a couple of big benefits to do first European markets and then at one point maybe go further.
And I mean, we're living in a time where it's very easy to always complain about politics. Let's turn it around. I mean, we have a European election coming up. I mean, what are the impulses coming out of Brussels you're hoping towards this Europeanization of fintechs?
Yeah, I mean, less bureaucracy. That would be my one hope for the European Union. I think the answer to everything we see on the right-wing side in Europe cannot be that Europe is great. I think the answer needs to be reform. The answer needs to be closer connection to the European people. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think what Europe has done in the last 20 years is great. It's foundation for the life that I'm living today, with offices in Berlin, Vienna, Barcelona. So the borders don't exist in reality of life today for, I think, everyone here in the room and people that work internationally. But I think we need to be better in also as the economy to sell and understand what Europe is great in and what maybe Europe is not as great in.
And if I now again look towards maybe less established fintechs, any advice you would give there in terms of, okay, how do you really want to do European strategies? Are there certain sectors where you say they're super interested in certain regions?
Yeah. I think my advice would be get to scale. I think many companies, especially in these times, focus too much too early on is it profitable? And you have to have obviously an understanding of the model and how do you get profitable at what size, and is it in general a model where there's a good margin in? But I think the realization in fintech is that you need a couple of million customers to be relevant, and if you don't reach that, you'll never be relevant. And I think I would give everybody the advice in the first 5 years to only focus on customer-driven kind of metrics, activity of customers, engagement with the platform, transaction volume, and less on absolute margin, while at the same time have a long-term perspective on where kind of the profitability comes from.
Yeah, and I think then we're back in the question, do we have investors who actually are willing to wait for that in the current environment, and we have to see how this year's playing out. I think question to you then, if I'm looking at 2024 and 2025 in fintechs, I mean, what would be the sectors you would personally invest in going forward? Who should pitch to you tonight?
So I've been pretty reluctant on doing investments because it takes a lot of time. Yeah? So the problem is if you don't go into funds but direct investments, actually to be serious about it, you need to spend quite some time with the entrepreneurs to be also able to, you know, support your investment decision also after a year or after some time. At the same time, I think I would say every vertical in fintech is still there for disruption. So I don't think at all that we've reached a plateau. I sometimes hear and there's not so much innovation going to happen anymore in fintech. I think the market is huge. It's still with the traditional banks. It's still super slow, and it starts with credit models, with AML, with fraud, the application of AI for customer service. I mean, we just launched our own trading and ETF trading product. So the market goes from lending to credit, and in each of the areas you can build billion-dollar companies. So the question is, do you have the investors in this surrounding to start? But if you have a great team, if you have maybe already experience in founding companies, there will be also investors backing you.
No, I mean, I think it's very interesting times to say that. I think that maybe to round it off, if I'm also looking around here, I mean, a lot of this whole conference is really about partnerships. And working together, I mean, with software companies, with different technology providers, banks, fintechs, all with each other. How do you think this is evolving? I mean, you spoke quite a bit about standalone models at the moment. Where do you see that evolving going forward?
I mean, partnerships are always tricky because you have the extremely big players where I think there's always a question of a dynamic. So can a really huge player work together with you and be as dynamic so that it doesn't harm your business but also gives you the opportunity? Some big companies can do that better. Some, I think, is harder. But I think you need to be very clear on what's the purpose of a partnership before you start it. In general, I think banking is all about partnerships. Yeah? So we do a lot of partnerships, mainly with other fintech companies. We've just launched our trading product with Upvest. We work together with Bitpanda, I think, who was here on stage earlier today as well. We work with MasterCard for issuing our cards and the brand. We work with the processing company. So we have actually a lot of partners that we work together with. If it comes to kind of corporate partnerships, so that the bigger ones, for us it has been hard in the past to make them work. But if they are, you know, very focused on a specific topic, then can work. And
how about traditional banks? Could you see yourself going into that direction as well at some point?
So I think we already work with different banks in different areas. Yeah? Banking is a big word, so we definitely work with different investment banks on different funding things, and also in the future we'll. I think we work with banks. We have a treasury book that is a couple of billions big, so there we work with different banks and also invest into stock. There's many touch points. I think it's tougher to work together on the retail banking side directly. It can be for certain products. I see that in the future maybe coming up as well. But the question is always, what's the benefit for whom? And I think we are more trying to work together on the corporate things, so treasury investments, credit strategies in the background. But I think if there are touch points, we're always open to do that.
No, very cool. So I think, and to maybe sum it up, and we already covered a lot of ground. We talked about the funding environment, which last year wasn't great, and I think you're giving a very cautious outlook on that one, the importance of partnerships, and also the tightrope fintechs, especially younger fintechs, need to run going into the future. Any surprising prediction from you? What maybe a breakout case? What we're going to see? Where you think, are we going to have another Gen AI point this year, or is this year more going to be, let's make what we have actually, I don't want to say great again, but much better?
So I think we are super focused on our business. I mean, we're in a fortunate position that we don't need any kind of external funding anytime soon. We'll be turning profitable hopefully in the second half of this year. So I think I would give the advice: be focused on your business and focus on the fundamentals that you want to reach. I think external uncertainty, just you need to have more buffer, and you don't want to be in a situation where you are dependent on a single decision of a single investor or a single market thing to happen. But in general, I'm super positive about the next years, and we'll see what comes out of the US election next year. We'll see what happens with Ukraine, which is also there. But I think fundamentals, maybe not in Germany, in other markets are strong.
Okay. Now I would say thank you so much, Valentin. I mean, this has been very enlightening. So first of all, big thank you to you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to the two of you, especially Valentin, for joining us on our 5th anniversary. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Inspiring.